Hello and welcome. Good evening, Reverend Fathers. How are you? Or good afternoon, shall I say?
Good afternoon.
Hello.
Excellent. Oh, good. No echoes. Brilliant. Super. Well, here we are at our 42nd episode of Old Romans Unscripted. This evening, of course, well, here in... what am I from you? East or west?
East.
East.
Yes.
Here in the eastern part of the northern hemisphere, it's already the feast of the Holy Name and the second Sunday after Epiphany, where of course we will commemorate the third theme of Revelation of Epiphany Tide, our Lord's first miracle at Cana in Galilee, the changing of water into wine. Now, I'm delighted to have discovered this week that a national charity here in the UK has agreed with me that we all should be continuing to celebrate Christmas and leaving our Christmas decorations up until February. English Heritage, I don't know why I didn't pick this up, but English Heritage have had a campaign on Twitter and Facebook and elsewhere, #StillChristmas, and they have encouraged people to follow our medieval forebears by keeping their Christmas decorations up, keeping the cheer and the positivity and the hope up through the January blues until Candlemas on February the 2nd. Those of you who are regular viewers of the Daily Mass broadcast will know that almost every day in my homily I've encouraged everyone to put their crib up if they put it away, get it back up, put it out again, and otherwise to try and keep some Christmas cheer going. And actually during my homily this morning, talking about the lapsi and Pope Marcellus, the first of his name, Bishop and Martyr of Rome, who of course was all for reconciling those who had otherwise apostatized from the faith during the Diocletian persecution. But there was this particular group, the lapsi, who had political connections going right up to the emperor, because of course they were able to persuade the emperor eventually to exile Marcellus, because he refused to receive them back into the church because they refused to do penance for apostatizing. In other words, they burnt the little grains of incense before the pagan idols and kept their jobs, kept their positions, kept their riches, kept their position in society, etc. And it struck me this morning about counterculturalism, and the gospel is all about counterculturalism, and going on, the thoughts I've already shared are kind of along these themes of keeping Christmas going, particularly in January. It all kind of fell into place and made sense, because actually the most countercultural thing we could do in January as Christians is keep Christmas going, because commercially and for everyone else they've taken down their decorations. They do that by January the 6th, if not before. Some families I know take it down Boxing Day, but of course they have been celebrating Christmas since the end of November, since the beginning of December. And ordinarily, in non-COVID years, ordinarily everyone would have had Christmas parties, Christmas office parties, Christmas drinks, Christmas dinner parties and everything throughout December, so that by the time Christmas Day and Boxing Days come, it's all a bit of a letdown. And everyone's basically had enough of Christmas by then, which is no wonder why they then are so quick to take it all down. And it occurred to me this morning, well, of course, that would be the most countercultural thing for us as Christians to do, to keep it going through January. What do you think?
I think it's a great idea. I think Catholic or Christian institutions should have their Christmas parties after January. It'll be a lot cheaper to book the venue. Of all the Christmas regalia, I still have my Christmas tree up, despite the best efforts of my cats to pull it down. They've done a pretty good job of the lower branches. But I'm not at home at the minute. I'm up at the street, and I noticed my neighbors coming through still have their tree lit. He is the wife is American, but he is Austrian. So I'm assuming the tradition comes from Baum is still in full splendor. But yeah, no, I think we have to reclaim the ground. I said to a colleague at work in January, in fact, no, it wasn't, it was a patient, not a colleague. I said, and she was of Hispanic heritage. Well, tomorrow's Three Kings Day. I'll remember you at Mass. On Sunday. So we had an interesting conversation about that, and she agreed with me. She said, "Why can't we take the day off? The Jews do it, the Muslims do it. Take the day off, pull your kids out of school, and go to Mass in the morning, and have a family celebration the rest of the day. What could be more wonderful than that?
Yeah.
Celebrating Christian heritage more than that. We should do that with all religious feasts.
Yeah, absolutely.
We have to start living counterculturally.
Yeah.
When on Friday at work, with the barbecue chicken was the only option, and they offered it to me, and I said, "Sorry, I don't eat meat on Friday." Well, because I'm a Catholic, and traditionally Catholics don't eat flesh meat on Fridays. I thought that was just during Lent. I said, "No, for traditional Catholics." So off she went, and she pulled into the kitchen, and they came up with a veggie burger for me. And we have to, people will be accommodating, but it's the same thing. If all they had was pork loin at the cafeteria, and you came along, or a Muslim, and said, "Well, I'm sorry, I don't," they would have to make an accommodation. So we have to start demanding this, expecting it, explaining, because it's not just staking our place in the marketplace. It's an opportunity to evangelize, an opportunity for apologetics, where we can explain why we do these things, and particular aspect of our faith that making us do this. We seem to be, I think we've discussed this before, we seem to be the only ones that are exempt from tolerance.
Absolutely. I mean, I think part of the problem is, of course, is that particularly in the West, in the North, there is this kind of residual Christian heritage. But the problem is that we've allowed ourselves as Christians, we've allowed commercial forces and the new sort of contemporary culture to overtake that, and we now follow their lead, which is why Christians, instead of fasting during Advent, we've all bought into that lie that Advent's not the same as Lent. Well, actually, it is pretty much. We all bought into that, so that now we're all celebrating Christmas a month early, and then we're all taking down our decorations at the beginning of January, and then we're all feeling blue and low and depressed for at the beginning of the new year. I mean, one of the things that here we've always kept in the oratory chapel, we've always kept the crib up and everything, up until Candlemas. And what's lovely here now, the weather has turned. So this morning was particularly bleak and grey and dark and raining. It was wet, it was cold, there was wind. And it was lovely walking in to the oratory chapel this morning and genuflecting, seeing the crib. And we have an electric light that with battery operated that's left on in the crib throughout the season. and coming in and then lighting the candles for the altar for Mass, switching the Christmas tree lights on, and it just lifts you. It just it gives you hope. It lifts your spirits. It's the one aspect of sort of sentimentalism and stuff that I can go for, because and so why deny ourselves that as practicing Christians? Why deny ourselves that? It's quite obvious that in times past, the tradition was to fast right up until Christmas, but then feast like nobody's business for a good month afterwards. Let's bring it back, I say. What do you think, Father Thomas?
Oh, of course. Nothing beats a good feast than a good fast. So, we have the fasting before Christmas, then we feast for Christmas tide, and then we go into fasting for Lent, and then we feast for Easter, Pentecost, Ascension, and then that feasting carries us all the way through post-Pentecost season, up and down feasting, little celebrations here and there. And then that brings us right back to fasting for, St. Martin's, Lent, Advent, and we repeat the whole cycle over again. If you do it properly as a Catholic, your weight should not really fluctuate much throughout the year. If you're really good Catholic, you should actually lose weight. Pointing at you two. So
mine doesn't fluctuate. Unfortunately.
So
if it only could.
Especially as you were talking about the feasting and celebrations for Christmas, especially here for us in Chicago, January is one of the colder months, and nothing does the good heart and soul good than cozying up with a nice warm Christmas beverage drink of your choosing, a nice cozy fire, and a good Catholic reading, and just enjoying the nice winter of Chicago. That's a great way to celebrate Christmas, or wherever you are in the world. In a sense, if it's too warm to have a drink of beverage of warmness, but maybe a cool beverage drink or whatever. But yet we still remember that this is Christmas. We still wish everybody a Merry Christmas, a Happy Epiphany. We keep joyful. And even at work, again this year, my coworkers, they realized last year, and I think the year before, maybe I shouldn't be the one doing the decorating around the dispensary, because I told them, if I'm going to decorate for Christmas, you're more than willing. If you want to take down the Christmas decorations, you're more than willing to. But if I put them up, they're staying up till February 2nd, Christmas. Like when Christmas tide ends, I will take the Christmas decorations down. If I put them up, I'll take them down. We're celebrating Christmas properly. And it actually kind of brings a little bit more. You see people still a little bit more joyful. You see that that wonderful cheer is still kind of resonating, and so I think that's a good thing. But I think next year they're going to probably try not to get me to decorate again. But it's one of those things where we as Christians, yes, we need to be countercultural. Yes, we need to, and I guess maybe instead of being maybe more pessimistic or being aggressive with it, maybe just be Christian. Instead of putting countercultural, just be Christian cultural, living our faith out. And if that causes people to look at us like a third eye, or causes us some type of discomfort or ridicule, St. Paul says it the best. Let me be called a fool for Christ. So
I think the part of the problem is that many would say that what passes now is Christian cultural. The fact that most people celebrate Christmas still in the West, in the North. So I think it is. I think, and I'm not saying that countercultural should be a slogan, but I do think, as a principle, it's worth reminding ourselves as Christians that we are not supposed to be conforming to the world, and we certainly shouldn't be allowing the world to dictate our religious observance and the praxis of our faith.
Can you send that memo to Pope Francis?
And yet, in so many ways, though, we have and we are. We have and we are, and so I think it's actually about reclaiming, our
The Vatican?
culture, reclaiming our culture. If you want to go there already, it's a bit soon in the program, but if you want to go there already, look at the contemporary praxis of Rome. As the bishop has already mentioned, there are contemporary Catholics who probably think that they are devout, and that they've been Catholics all their lives and they know what Catholic custom and tradition is, but who will look askance at the fact that we keep Epiphany on the day on January the 6th instead of transferring it to Sunday. It's gobsmacking in some ways. I was watching the other day the installation of the new Archbishop of Lyon in France, and the traditional way of greeting the bishop is at the door of the church, and sure enough, there was a don't know where they dragged him up from, but there was an old canon who was obviously given the job of greeting the new bishop at the threshold. They didn't bother with a prière Dieu, with a kneeling desk. Okay. The canon was dressed in choir dress. He wore his canon's mozzetta and rochet and cassock. The bishop arrived in a soutane, a house soutane, rather than choir dress, which I thought was a bit of a pity. There was a great long speech that the canon read out. It's all in French, greeting the new bishop officially and formally to his cathedral, and expressing the joy of the chapter and so on and so forth. And then what should have followed then was the usual ritual for greeting a bishop at the door. Now, as I say, they didn't have a prière Dieu, which is a bit of a pity. But the old canon remembered that he needed a crucifix, so he turned, and one of his colleagues came forward with a massive, great crucifix. And I thought, oh, good, well, that's something. So the canon presented it, and the bishop kissed the feet of the corpus on the crucifix. I thought, okay, well, that's good. Let's see what happens next. Then the canon turned round and was prompted, and somebody came with the aspergillium bucket and the aspergillium, presented it to the canon. He presented it to the bishop. Now, in the background, you could see the thurifer and the boat boy waiting. The bishop took the aspergillium. Now, of course, what you're supposed to do, traditionally, is you just asperse the immediate people around you. This is from the bishop's perspective. So you do front, left, right, and that's it. Then you hand back the aspergillium, and then you take the thurible, and then you do once, twice, thrice to those that are immediately around you, and that's it. Ceremony over. And then you process, the traditional rite. You process then to the Blessed Sacrament Chapel, adore momentarily, and greet the Lord in the tabernacle, and then be vested for Mass. Well, this, I would say, new bishop, but he's not a new bishop. He's translated from another see to be Archbishop of Lyon. Clearly was not familiar with this rite of receiving a bishop at all. And when he was handed the aspergillium, proceeded to walk down the whole nave of the cathedral into the choir, sprinkling everyone that was there, shaking hands, saying hello, having little conversations, oh my gosh, it's you, hi, blah, 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 all the rest of it. And you could see, because the, KTO, who are the Catholic television company in France, were filming the whole thing, and you could, they realised this isn't quite what's going on. This isn't in the script. And off he goes, right down the centre of the nave, sprinkling everyone, and then he gets to the end, and the little server that's following him with the bucket, and he turns to the server and looks at him as if to say, what now? By which time the MC has legged it up the aisle and then has motioned to him this way. So then he goes the wrong way then round to the Blessed Sacrament altar and to the chapel, and then goes to vest for Mass. Now the thing that got me, it's not just the fact that this was a balls up, from a ritual liturgical perspective. It's the fact that the bishop himself, a senior bishop who's been translated to an archiepiscopal see, had no familiarity, no knowledge of this rite of the reception of a bishop at all, such that he made that mistake and started sprinkling everyone. It just
Who appointed him?
Well, who do you think?
Well, perhaps that's the litmus test. If you can't perform the ritual of reception, you're promoted.
But the thing is, sorry, but the thing is, go on.
He probably thought he was doing a grand thing.
Oh yeah, probably did.
One of the smelling like the sheep and all that sort of stuff, and saying howdy doody to everybody and washing away the smell of the sheep or the water. But it's just sort of make it up as you go along thing. It has been affecting the church for the past years.
Yeah.
And it becomes nonsense. It's laughable, like you illustrated. It comes to the end of it, he doesn't know what he's going to do. And he turns to look for direction. And the answer to that is, Your Grace, you started it, finish it. Where do you want to go to next? You want to go for burrito next door?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's but the sad thing is that it was with the thing. Remember that, watching that and trying not to emote too much about it, but watching that and then thinking about the fact that Epiphany had been for most people kept on Sunday rather than on the 6th of January, and all sorts of things that. I mean, I was listening to a program the other day, and somebody said that with the Novus Ordo, there are so many alternates, like ors, to celebrate the liturgy. Everything's like modularized, isn't it? So you have the rite of the entrance antiphon, and there's 101 different ways that you can enter the church. Then there's the rite of greeting, and there's umpteen different ways you can say hello to everyone. Then there's the penitential rite, and there's 101 different ways you can celebrate the penitential rite. And some mathematician worked it out that there was almost like a few million different ways. Actually, if you put all the formulation, if you rearranged all the different parts in all the different ways that you possibly could, there's like a million options as to how to say Mass with the Novus Ordo.
And that, Your Grace, that's only if you stick with the rubrics.
Yeah, that's only if you stick to the rubrics. Absolutely, yeah. That's not allowing for personal tastes.
Infinitesimal.
Yeah, which is is just crazy, and you think, well. Yeah, so how can there be any uniformity to these things? How can they how do you express or how do you realise the universalism of the church? Crazy stuff.
It is crazy stuff. Yeah.
But part of it as well, and as well, that all that kind of smell of the sheep malarkey. But it's when you watch, I don't know why I do it, to be honest. I don't know why I watch these things, but the Archbishop of Paris.
It's like hot sauce. You know it's going to hurt, but you enjoy it.
or like a traffic accident, everyone slows down and watches.
You can't stop watching.
But it just, the variations I've seen in censing an altar is
that's gone.
They don't. But that's just it. They don't know. They don't know. And why don't they know? I mean, it's in the missal. There's diagrams, shows you how to do it. Why don't they know? I mean, and why don't they care to know? That's the thing. I think that's the thing that gets me. Is why don't they care to know? Because But this is the thing that priests and bishops, for example. This is the thing that makes us different. Is that the liturgy is our particular responsibility and fruit of our vocation, isn't it? More or less, everyone else could do everything else, but saying mass, offering the mass, celebrating the liturgy or leading the liturgy, that's essentially what we're ordained to do. That's what makes our ordination different. So why don't all these clergy? Why aren't they familiar with the very thing for which they were ordained? Why don't they care? Why don't they have an interest?
Because they do get the fact that they're responsible for it. So they got to show up at 11 o'clock, do the mass for the people. Lovely, great celebration together. The thing they miss is they get the responsible for it. They do not get the responsible to it. And we have to remember that as priests. We are responsible to the liturgy, to preserve that which we were handed on. Preserve the traditions, to do things correctly, in order to give that for the people. So that things are done in right order, proper order, that people get what they deserve and what they're entitled to. And that's the big disconnect. They do still almost, although COVID is showing up, the fact that I don't think they even think they're responsible for the liturgy anymore. They're willing to shut it down, make it available. So perhaps having lost one side of it, they're going to lose both sides of it, which means priests are no longer responsible for the liturgy at all.
Yeah,
the answer is simple, and Your Excellency, you made great points, but they lost supernatural faith. They've never been taught supernatural faith. They do not have supernatural faith. They don't. The seminaries did not teach them about the faith. They taught them this liberal, modernist, a lot of other words that would probably get us kicked off this platform, indoctrination, because they're not about offering sacrifice. They're not about the sacred priesthood. They're about playing dress up, making the people feel good, and accompanying them to hell because they don't have faith. And it's from the hierarchy down. You can see this from everybody. And if you're surprised and shocked at this, you need to pull your head out of the sand. Because this is why the old Roman Catholic Church exists. This is why the traditional churches exist. This is what Archbishop Lefebvre was fighting against. This is what we as true Orthodox Roman Catholics are fighting for. The preservation of Holy Mother Church, the faith, the liturgy. As we've all pointed out, the obligation of us as clergy is to the liturgy, to the church, not to the people like they think so. It's us to God, to bring God to the people. And if we don't do that in season and out of season, it doesn't matter if I have a full basilica of parishioners at a church and I'm offering a beautiful high mass, or if I'm offering a simple, beautiful low mass here at the friary. It's the same liturgy, and it has the same efficacious purposes that God has ordained it to have. And if a priest remains true to that, the priest is then doing his part in what he's ordained to do. But again, with COVID, with these pandemics, with these plagues, you saw in St. Charlesboro Mail's time, priests were out in the corners offering the liturgy, giving people the sacraments, out in the streets with people literally dying in the streets. And the liturgy was still being offered. The Holy Sacrifice of Mass was being offered. Today, shut the doors, barricade them. Priests, you can go play your video games. You can go do whatever you want to do. You got a vacation indefinitely. If you feel like doing some live streaming of Masses, go for it. Have some fun with it. You know, really just ham it up to make the people feel good, because that's what the people want. And so hopefully they can donate online, because we still need money. Don't forget that aspect of it. And that's the problem. The problem is we are fighting against the ape of the church.
Well, there's lots of there's lots of problems, and this. I mean, for example, the terrible English word love. Okay, now caritas, agape, is the love that is spoken of in the New Testament in the Gospel. So when St. John says God is love, he's saying he is sacrificial love. He is agape, he is caritas, he is selfless love. He is all those things that St. Paul writes about in his ode to charity, gentleness, patience, meekness, humility, etc. But all the time, particularly people confuse love with the romanticized, reciprocal, sentimental, etc. That the world, so they confuse the worldly idea of love, niceness, reciprocal niceness, romanticized or romanticized lust, or sentimentalized relationships, etc. And that's a big part of the problem for the church today, is that you were hitting on there, Father. People within the church have forgotten the concept of sacrifice, and when you've lost that, so when you've lost the understanding of the gospel understanding of what love is, and therefore you've lost the notion and principle of sacrifice, well, essentially then you've lost the gospel. Because without that, it's nothing. Without that, it's nothing. I mean, it's at one point in my homily this morning, I said, people say to me, oh, don't you know it's unlucky to keep your Christmas decorations up past 12th night? To which I say, so am I superstitious then? I'm a Christian, I'm not superstitious. And in my head, I was thinking, somebody might turn around and say, oh, well, Christianity, that's all about superstition, it's all about make-believe, and blah, blah, blah. But the point is, it's not, is it? What we do in church, what we do in celebrating the liturgy, everything has meaning. Everything has meaning. It's not just nice. We don't wear vestments just because they're nice. They mean something. They convey something. They have a symbolism. We don't say the words that we do in prayers because they sound nice. They have meaning. They have significance. They have symbolism. They affect things. They change things. We believe, don't we? I mean, it's like some people might say, oh, well, if I kept my Christmas decorations up, the neighbours would say that, I was being weird. And it's like, well, excuse me, which part of you believe that God became man, and then died on the cross and then rose again 3 days later? Which part of that do you not think is weird for most people? And it's. This is.
It's one of those baffling things. It's like we're so caught up in what our neighbor does, and the whole slogan "keeping up with the Joneses," that we lose focus on ourselves. We lose focus on a relationship with God. And I was just talking with somebody this morning about prepping for Lent and his Lenten devotions and what he would like to do for Lent. He has some circumstances arising, so I was helping him out with that. But I told him, I'm like, it doesn't matter what other people are doing. It matters what you're doing. And it matters your relationship with God and adhering to the precepts of the church and the wonderful traditions and liturgies of Holy Mother Church. And if you keep true to that, don't worry about what anybody else says or how they look at you. Just, we need to stop caring about what other people think of us and stop focusing on how God thinks of us. Because ultimately, he's the one that judges us at the end, right? Like, he's our judge, jury, and executioner. He loves us, but he's merciful, but he's also just. And every time that we slip up, he's there with loving open arms to embrace us, to forgive us, and to help us. But if we do not allow ourselves to be disposed of that, then what are we doing? Like when you shut the confessionals down because of COVID, and you have to be in this great auditorium 6 feet apart, and you have to shout your sins to the priest, who then has to shout back to you your penance and your spiritual advisement, if you're lucky to get that. It's like, how is that even... I mean, I get it's possible, but I mean, it just doesn't... It's not the same as going into the box, having a screen, having a curtain, and doing the whisper, doing the secret. You know, it's that intimacy that you're missing. The intimacy between the penitent and the confessor is gone, dissolved. And I'm
all for it. That's the way it used to be until the Irish got involved.
Okay, well,
in the early church, you did confession in front of everybody. That's where the penitential rite comes from. You did it in front of everyone.
Well, of course.
If you want to be uber hard, like, that's what you should be advocating, Father Tom. Is you shame yourself in front of the congregation and express your sins.
It was the practice of the Irish monks to have individual confession, and it was eventually adopted universally as a sort of compassionate way, that instead of the literal people of the local church hearing the sin against the church, that the priest on behalf of the church could hear the sin of confession. But, I mean, I joke because it's...
Well, yes. And I mean...
But what has developed, and you're very right in your point, what has developed is there is an intimate... people have developed an intimate relationship with their confessor. And that is a really good thing, because the confessor knows them. The confessor knows their pattern of sin. They can advise them. They can warn them against patterns of falling into, and they can exhort them when they are managing to change their lives. So I want to make the joke, but I also want to lift up the point that the intimacy between a penitent and a confessor, a regular confessor, is something that is a really good thing. Can benefit. It really is the doctor of the soul.
And I mean, right now, I just want to add one more thing on that whole confession thing, because right now, the seal of confession is back under attack in North Dakota, here in the United States. There's a law being placed right now in North Dakota for clergy to divulge any information pertaining to child abuse or anything like that, no matter what grounds they heard it on. At one point in time in that law, it was said that if it was heard under the sacrament or under a sacramental rite or pastoral advisement, confidential, that it would be exempt. They just this past week removed that line, so now it would call the priest to be charged with not giving information. The word just escaped me. Seriously, interference with an investigation if they do not divulge the information, even if they heard it in the confessional. So again, we're back up to the seal of confession
But
being.
my point in those laws, and there are various of them, doesn't it dissolve into, because there are only two people involved, right? There's the priest and the penitent. And if the penitent says, and the penitent can also falsely accuse the priest of having heard it, it falls into a he said thing. How do you prove it? How do you prove the priest heard it?
Because the letter of the law is to protect children, yes, and to protect those and to apprehend those who are abusing.
I'm talking about the application of the law.
But the application of the law is ideally to dissolve the seal of confession, to attack one more sacrament of the church.
But how can they apply it?
Because they're going to abuse it like they've abused all the other laws and the persecutions of the church. Just like right now in Ireland, you can't offer a mass without going to jail. If a priest offers a mass publicly, he gets arrested and goes to jail right now. Like, that's the law on the books in Ireland.
That's very different.
Again. But
that is applicable because there are multiple people, including the police, can see the priest offering mass, and if they apply the unjust law, but if it's a penitent and a priest hearing, and let's say the priest heard that the penitent was involved in child abuse, and then the abuser turns around and says, "Well, I told the priest that." I mean, the priest first of all has to remain silent.
Right.
So it's he said he's silenced. How do you prove that?
Because they want to attack the church. Because they're going to go off. They're going to go off these false. They're going to use the he said, he said, whatever. That does not hold up in law, but they're going to make it hold up in law. They're going to jump through legal loopholes and just complete. Well, I mean, see what's going on right now with the left and what they're trying to do. And this isn't even a left state. This is a far right state that's doing this, which is troubling. But the point is, the church again is going under attack, and the sacrament of confession is being attacked now, and all this stuff going on because of the safety. Yes, safety 100% for children and those who are abused. Of course, they need help. Their abusers need to face justice, and they need to have that temporal punishment due. But there's better ways to go about it than attacking the church and attacking the sacraments. And
yeah, I mean, I think part of the problem here, of course, is that, praise God, thank God, this ain't our circus, in one respect, in terms of the why this has come about, and the ideas and attitudes that people have around all this. I mean, personally, if the church had learned to become itself more transparent about these sort of issues, then the likelihood is that nobody would be attacking the seal of the confessional. And there is an easy solution, and I don't. It baffles me why Francis hasn't done this, which is simply to say, right, any accusations, any allegations, whatever, straight to the civil authorities, straight to the police, straight to the civil authorities, hand over everything to them, let them deal with it. When they've gone through their investigations, their trial procedures, blah blah blah, then we can go through a canonical procedure at an appropriate time during or after. But for goodness sake, let's just be transparent in the first instance and just hand everything over to the civil authorities. Now, if the institutional church did that,
you'd lose 60% of your priests and bishops.
It would go a long way to establishing trust with civil authorities. It would go a long way with establishing trust with victims and their families. It would be now, but the thing is. It would be nothing to do that. It would be nothing to do that. There is no harm in doing that. There's no contravention, really, in principle of canonical procedures in doing that. To include a civil investigation from the off. Nothing in canon law says you can't. Nothing in canon law says you shouldn't. In fact, nothing in canon law justifies any of the basically the malfeasance and the malpractice that has been perpetuated. But that would be the biggest PR hit for the institutional church if Francis were to say, right, and a wonderful liberalesque gesture to say, right, as of now, all sexual abuse cases and blah 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 blah, complete transparency. Everything has to be given to the civil authorities. Everything's reported to them. Allow them to police us. We'll allow them to issue the guidelines, to enforce the guidelines, to inspect, check, make the balances, ensure that everyone is doing everything that they should be doing, etc., etc. It would alleviate the church from all that extra headache and bureaucracy and everything else, which it clearly it cannot cope with, and actually it would shift all the onus of responsibility back to the state and the civil authorities, so that then if something goes wrong, well, actually it's down to them, because they're in charge, they're in control of the whole process. It's their guidelines, it's their checks and balances, so on and so forth. Bishop Kennedy.
Yeah. You kind of at the end of that addressed point that I was going to bring up. Civil authorities are not always as pure as they claim to be. You just need to look at the persecution of Cardinal Pell. The travesty that was heaped on him. But you're right then in the end that that's not the church's fault. It was the civil authorities that persecuted him, that went after him, maligned him, and screwed against him. But there was a lot of fanfare at the beginning. There was a lot of fanfare at the trial of Cardinal Pell and the so-called conviction. It was pianissimo on his. I'm searching for his vindication.
Yeah. I mean, he was dropped like the proverbial to a brick.
Yeah.
But actually, there's nothing that the church, in many ways, could have done. I mean, they could have been better, perhaps, at giving him more pastoral support and stuff.
And they might not have transferred the money to Australia. So.
Well, and we still haven't got to the bottom of all that. Father Tom.
Anyway, we're down a rabbit hole now, I think.
Right. Well, no, I just wanted to, I was going to bring up what Bishop Kelly just brought up about civil authorities and how trustworthy they could be on stuff. And you see a lot of the good priests here in the United States that have been falsely accused and have gone through civil authorities who have pretty much had their clerical career ruined.
Yeah, but there's no way around that, Tom. But there's no way around that, Father. There's no way you can get round that.
So what I'm just saying is,
that will happen anyway.
Right. But what I'm saying is, to your point, is that the church herself should, as well as being transparent and handing this matters over that need to be taken care of civilly, also need to come down canonically and take care of things, and not let things drag out and let these secrets and these cover-ups continue on.
Well, that's what transparency would cover.
Right. But so you need to have that transparency in civil authorities, but first and foremost, you need to have that transparency in the canonical matter and bring canonical tribunals to the clerics involved in this, because that's the only way. And let the civil state, let the state matter and the judicial system do their process, but don't just hand it over and say you don't have to do anything. No, you still have to do the canonical thing to do.
What you would have to do, the only sensible thing to do would be to suspend the individual, see what happens with the civil case, and then weigh up what has happened with the civil case, and then apply canonical procedure and discipline accordingly. the point is that the idea of conducting an investigation internally is just not possible. It's not reasonable. It's not acceptable for anybody. For that to happen anymore, and there's nothing. If you hand it all over to the civil authorities, you can't be more transparent. Now, okay, there's a risk that you may get nefarious individuals and agents within the civil authority who will abuse the situation. Well, but there's nothing anyone can do about that anyway.
I think your point is, and what Father was saying, is that, I think people were rightly shocked and, to put it mildly, disappointed in the behavior of certain priests and religious. But I think what absolutely destroyed people's faith was the institutional cover-up. And your Father's right in the fact that the church has to be... all right, they covered it up in the past. The church cannot cover it up in the future. They have to be very transparent. And I think you're right. And one way of doing that is that here are the facts we have. We've given it to you, civil authorities, and you go through it. And if there are repercussions, then the church can say, well, these are the facts that we give you. This doesn't match this. How did you reach that conclusion? And they can claim, if situation arises, that the civil authorities were unjust, and they can present their case because the facts are out in the open.
Yeah. Well, then you go through the whatever the civil legal appeals procedure is, or for raising grievances or whatever.
Which ultimately prevailed with Cardinal Pell, even though he spent a year in jail.
Yeah.
And actually, did his book come out yet? I can't remember.
Yeah, just at Christmas.
It did. Yeah. I need to get that because I've heard great things about that book.
Yeah.
I think he did. He spent that 1 year in prison in a very, very penitential, and I heard it was just great, a good read. So
it's had very good reviews.
I need to get me a copy of that sometime and go over it because I think that's something maybe all of us should maybe do. Some Lenten reading, maybe. How about that encouragement? Because we're getting close to the Testament seasons, right? We're still in Epiphany. We're still Christmas. We're still celebrating, but
So if we're reading Cardinal Pell's book, in the Jessima Sundays, it's in Gen Pop. But as soon as we hit Ash Wednesday, it's in lockdown, isolation.
Yeah.
You're speaking my lingo there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, so obviously then, right? So let's try and think about this in practical terms then. In what ways would counterculturalism manifest itself in the ordinary everyday life of an Orthodox practicing Catholic? So one thing would be getting up and kneeling and saying prayers from the off. Two, preferably, if you could, go to Mass. If you could go to Mass in the morning, if you could go to Mass before work, that'd be even better. I mean, and no one's ever really explained to me why pre-Vatican II you had all sorts of options for early morning Mass, all sorts of options anywhere. There was always early morning masses from 3, 4, 5 a.m. all the way up to 9 a.m. You could go to half a dozen masses if you wanted to before you went to work. After Vatican II, nothing, nada. Unless you can get to forgive, as one priest coined a phrase for it. Unless you can get to Missa Geriatrica at 10:30. By which he meant because I know it's partly as well because of I don't really because they reduced everything down to one Mass a day. and invariably, it became 10:30 in the morning, and only those who were retired could go to it. Hence, Missa Geriatrica. But I mean, how did that happen?
It's the change in mindset. So, before the council, to make the mass available for those who would, and you're quite right. There were certainly 6, 7, and 8 o'clock masses. People who started at 9 o'clock or 8 o'clock, you're working at a factory or something. They were available. So you would leave the house, probably have your breakfast, so you would hear mass and not receive, and then go to your work. And it was supplied because it felt people wanted and needed to hear the mass. After the council, but you don't need mass. All right. The older people in the old ways, they'll want to have it. So we'll put something on at 9 or 10 o'clock, and they can come down to it and whisper their rosaries throughout it, and we'll put up with it. And it's just the entire shift in understanding what mass provides and what the Christian responsibility and need is.
I think as well though. One of the key things in that shift, that change in attitude was, it ain't liturgy unless you're participating. So the new the nouveau thinking
Theology.
was the nouveau thinking was forget. There's no point going to mass if you're only going to hear it. So we'll do away with them, and then we'll put on one mass. And if you come, then you're going to have communion. Otherwise, there's no point coming. Otherwise, we'll get rid of the mass.
Right. So my two points.
You only have an hour fast, so you can easily make 10 o'clock.
So my two.
An hour until you receive. So I mean, you could stop fasting half an hour before mass begins, if mass took mass took half an hour, which it does in the modern rite.
So my 2 points on this, the council changing are: one, we lost the clergy, so we didn't have the clergy anymore to offer those masses. Because you had 5, 6, maybe a dozen or so priests in one church, depending on where you're at.
Oh yeah.
Especially in the big cities. In the rural areas, you had maybe 1 or 2 priests, or maybe a deacon, or something like that. You had clergy available to offer more than one mass, and to stagger it out. And the second point that I like to make, maybe unpopular, is the faithful rebelled against the new mass. And for a while, like you said, for a while they said, okay, we'll go to it, we'll say our rosary, we'll keep our pious traditions that we've come accustomed to. But as that generation started dying out, and more people were not being fed the faith and catechized properly, and they're looking at this new mass and they're just not pleased with it, and they're not able to have a strong Catholic conviction with it, they just stopped going. Because, well, I can go to the high Anglican church down the street that's ad orientem, has the smells, has the bells, has the Latin, has all this stuff for that time frame, and they went there, or they went to the high Lutheran church, or they went to something that looked more Catholic, and then that's when you start getting this aesthetics, and you get these traditional Catholics that are looking for aesthetics, not actual Catholicism, and they just want to have a liturgy that looks good and kind of brings them up and makes them feel Catholic, makes them feel like they're rigid and all that, but it doesn't give them the true conviction of faith they need. It doesn't fertilize, cultivate their seed of faith that they need to grow and bear fruit. So and that's what happened in that time frame with the council, is you lost your clergy, you lost your good faithful clergy, and the faithful wised up and said, I'm not going to this. This is not Catholic. And that's why you drop down to having one mass a day if you're lucky.
I don't agree with you on that at all. After the council, you had the majority of priests were good and faithful, but they were brought up with an understanding is that you had to obey Rome. A lot of them didn't want to change, but they obeyed. I remember in the early 80s that the new Mass being celebrated with a lot of reverence and traditional Catholic understanding. So things were slower to change than that. I think the faithful obeyed. They may not have liked it, but they did go along with it. I think you have to wait for 10 or 20 years for the effect that you're talking about comes into play. Because, apart from the initial knee-jerk reaction, which is very small, very limited, because Catholics were programmed to accept the dictates from above, and they did, including the priests. Now, the older priests that were in the parish still maintained their Catholic faith, still preached their Catholic faith, still celebrated the new Mass with their Catholic faith. The dangerous ones, the theologians, were teaching in Slovene. The products of that were still coming out as the young clergy. You don't see the complete rupture that you're talking about 10, 20 years down the line, where you do see, particularly newer Catholics, not older, newer Catholics saying, well, what am I getting here? I can go down the street to the Anglos. They have better liturgy, they have better sermons, they have better music.
Well, there were a lot who converted. There were a lot who were converting from Anglicanism, who were going to then the Catholic Church and saying, "Hold on a minute, I thought everything that I was getting, I was going to get here, but it would be the real deal." I know lots of Anglicans who over the years have converted to Catholicism, and either ended up taking the catechism class themselves, effectively, or who stuck it out to be received, and then as soon as they could, went and sought a better ascetic somewhere else than they could get in the parish.
I guess one.
I was an altar boy at age 8, so that would have been 1984, 1985, and we had priest wore fiddleback vestments, sometimes with or without a maniple. The ablutions contained second wines and water. Communion was given only at the rail. There were vestiges of it still in those days. There was no open confession boxes. They were all closed confession boxes. We still had an appointed sacristan, last and appointed, and who wore his cassock that he was entitled to do. So those things were still there. It wasn't until 1989, 1990, we had the first Eucharistic minister, and that was a local nun who wore her habit and veil. So it was sort of soft peddling it in, and then the years then it was, this is Galilee.
Well, that's the interesting thing. Go on, Father Tom.
No. It wasn't as abrupt as people think it was. I think the real, once you get in 10, 20 years, then the real nefarious the bombs that were planted started to go off.
I'd say it was a mixture.
Hold on, because this is what I want to clarify.
It was a mixture.
This is what I wanted to clarify. So, because you grew up in Ireland, obviously very Catholic, very good, pious. I grew up in rural Michigan.
It now.
Well, when you were there, I'm talking about time and place here. So I grew up in rural Michigan, very conservative, very less changing. So we had it we didn't see the abrupt changes of the liturgy like I was talking about. I'm talking about the big cities, United States, the metropolitan areas where your Cardinal Bernardines and all this that's where the abrupt change was, and that's what I'm talking about. When you had 10 masses before noon on every day, and that's where the abrupt change was. Your metropolitan cities in the United States.
Yeah.
So I wanted to clarify that. That's what I was referring to.
It rippled out. Yeah.
Yeah. It was a mixture of the two. I mean, as you say, in the metropolises and the urban conurbations, etc. I mean, I know that the recavations began in the 70s. Suddenly you get these nasty concrete coronas and these central altars, and the tabernacle ripped away from the east end and stuck into a side room somewhere.
Did you say concrete coronas?
Yeah.
Is that where we got the virus from?
No. No, it's an architectural phenomena.
I'm making a joke.
Yeah. I mean, that's where this was the era of Paddy's Wigwam. Liverpool Metropolitan Cathedral.
No ethnic slur there at all. If the Irish were brown, you would be cancelled.
No, because I said wigwam.
What did you say before that? What did you say before that?
If the algorithm gets you.
This may be our last show,
Were you meant to say TP?
For anyone who doesn't know what we're talking about, Google search Liverpool Metropolitan Cathedral. I'll mute you in a minute. Liverpool Metropolitan Cathedral, and you will see it's the shape of the building is why it was referred to colloquially at the time as a wigwam. And it was to facilitate.
Explain the Paddy reference then.
Well, that was to facilitate the huge Irish congregation and descended immigrant congregation that paid for and built it.
There's nobody in my immediate family called Patrick.
Anyways, so recavations and all that sort of were going on at the time, and in large towns and as well as the cities and stuff. But for sure, in the more rural places, like West Wales and even further West Ireland, then the changes were slower. But
it's interesting though that religious orders were certainly the center of those big.
Massively.
Because, I mean, so you're right to point out like a diocese, archdiocese like Liverpool. So where you had seats of so-called thought and like religious orders, they're the ones that were really plugged into the new zeitgeist. They pushed it immediately. And even ones that have sort of redeemed themselves. I can think of the Dominicans who went way left field. Back to center right. Yes, I'm a little bit center now, but I mean the Jesuits have just gone way left field and stayed there. And in fact, they're ploughing subsequent fields left of that. They were the ones that really, because they were the so-called intellectuals, they were buying this nouveau theology, and it was just, that's where it's affected, or as we now say, impact.
Yeah, I would say them in the brown skirts, I'd say.
Yeah,
I like that term.
As opposed to the brown shirts. But the brown skirts.
That might also get you deplatformed.
They won't know what I'm talking about.
Thank God I wear gray.
Yeah. So, the reformers wear grey.
Well, those who actually know the Franciscan life wear gray because our seraphic father wore gray. So.
Yeah. But yes, I mean the religious orders were notorious for progressing all the changes, and nuns couldn't wait to take their clothes off and or their habits off.
The rest of us can wait to see them.
And throw on tartan on the whole, tartan and tweed.
Yeah, they dressed like Vicar's wives.
Yeah.
There wasn't a pleated skirt safe enough in Marks and Spencer's in the 1980s.
and then, but of course the thing was, is that prior to the council, you could tell from any habit, you could tell which order, which congregation, right even down to little diocesan congregations and stuff. You could, you knew from the habit. The habit was uniform. You could tell who they belonged to, who they were. And then suddenly there was this great proliferation. So apart from the tweed and the tartan brigade, then there was the others. For and the various shades of grey, blue, black, polyester, Teflon veils and tabards, and skirts and dresses, where so even within one convent, there'd be such a diversity of dress. So they might say, so it might be they all wore blue, okay, but some wore dresses, some wore sort of shortened tunics, some wore skirts, some wore blouses and blue cardigans. It would all vary, and the veils were there was no uniformity in the veil anymore. I miss the good old fashioned wimples, the proper wimples. The big ones, the boxes. I love the boxes. And then the ones with wings. I love the ones with wings.
I remember being told by
the Visitation Sisters, Daughters of Charity. They were brilliant with the big.
Yeah. But they weren't so good in a rainstorm because the whole thing flopped.
Yeah. Yeah. And
I remember being told by a Dominican sister, and I would name her, but she's still alive. That when they first relaxed the rules. This wasn't her, but it was two friends of hers, and they were teaching sisters, and they decided to take the train to Dublin, but for the first time not to wear their habits. They could relax and talk freely and not have people tip their hats to them and get up and stand in their presence and all that sort of thing. So they went in and they raided the fancy dress wardrobe in the drama department of the school. So they got skirts and blouses and off they went to Dublin. And they were on the train. People were still looking, whispering, and one of them said to the others, "Sister, we're still looking and staring at us as if we were still wearing our habits." Finally dawned on her, she said, "Yes, Sister Paul, they are." "No, Sister John, I'm astounded." They were calling each other Paul and John. It's the fact that these two women were calling each other by male names.
Yeah. Yes. But people forget, you see, that the whole point of the habit and the whole point of clericals is as much for the wearer to remind the wearer of what they're about and what their vocation is and how they should be conducting themselves. I mean, it's one of the things that always got me is clergy saying, I go incognito on my day off or whatever, because it always, to me, it just means, you want to get away with something. When somebody says, I want to be incognito, I want to be anonymous, or I want to be, well, what's that about? That just means you want to get away with something you're not supposed to get away with. I mean, because otherwise, this isn't a uniform. In one sense it is, but it's also vocation. And that was the key thing about the habit. The whole point of the habit is it expressed the vocation to the detachment from materialism, the spirit of poverty, humility, the loss of self identity, etc. That's what it all means. And you take that away, what are you left with?
No, it's why would you want to? I was, just before I came down here, I'd spent 2.5 hours driving. I was in a suit before that because I was at the hospital. For 2.5 hours. So I took off my collar. It's one of these nasty plastic ones, which can get annoying. So I took it off just for comfort. Right. And then I went into the store to get something to eat before I headed to the house. And I had my groceries and I was checking out. And, the woman said, she said, "Thank you very much. Good evening, Father." I mean, and I thought to myself, well, how did she know it? You dressed head to toe and back, and hell else wear studs in their shirts. She knew, and that was fine. I wasn't embarrassed or ashamed to be known. But the reason I bring that up is because you have the incognito crowd. They would be absolutely shocked if somebody said that to them.
Yeah. But in some ways, you see, because I mean, this was in my thoughts on my way home after Mass. I was thinking about this, and I was thinking because because how see, for the faithful, it has to be their attitude, it has to be their approach, it has to be the manifestation of their faith, especially in terms of being countercultural. It has to be something that is about their manner and about their being and about their approach to things, because they don't wear a uniform like we wear a uniform. So I mean, it's this is countercultural. Or
other faiths. Other faiths that are Muslim garb or
the faithful do. Yeah.
But Christians generally don't.
Yeah.
Now, I think we should. I know we're coming up on time, and I think perhaps we should continue this.
Oh yeah, definitely.
In a more structured version next week, because I think Christians need to become countercultural. They need to witness by their lifestyle. And there are ways of doing that. And I'm not here it's in my library, but I bought a book a couple of years ago called The Benedict Option.
Oh yes.
Of course, like many books I've bought, I haven't read it.
I've got it here.
But that's
somewhere.
something, you've got a copy of it as well.
Yeah.
So I think we should discuss various ways that could be lived out. But I think the era of Christians being, devout and serious Christians being wallflowers is over. We cannot.
Yeah. Definitely.
We need to stand up. We need to be seen. And actually, it's the only way to preach it. Whenever a minister or a pope comes out and says this, that, and the other, it'll either be lauded for its liberalism or derided for its faithfulness. And that's fine. Let the media do what it wants. We know how the only way to make Christianity mainstream again is to live it. And remember, the early Christians were a closed society. They were hidden. They were Christians of the catacombs, and they lived an intentional, deliberate life. And they preached it by their way of living, and eventually it became mainstream. And I think we need to start thinking like that again. That it's through the way we live, it's witness, and demand our rights to the freedom of our religion, that will ever become mainstream again.
Yeah,
because those days are gone.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean that's it's like I said a couple of weeks ago. Actually, we need ourselves to start using the rights and protections that currently are still in the law, that should offer us protection, and which you know, even those on the left or the progressive of politics couldn't argue with, because, you know, equality and diversity, etc. It's all there. We just haven't utilised it. You know, other faiths have, Sikhs have, Jews have, Muslims have. We need to start doing that ourselves. Absolutely. Right. Okay. Let's.
Sorry, just before that, the trouble is, and maybe this is the cliffhanger. The trouble is that we have Catholics, high orthodox Catholics, demand their right, because look at the makeup of the American government to be: Catholic president, Catholic leader of the House, Catholic Justice of the Supreme Court, along with many others. They're so-called Catholics. But when an Orthodox Catholic comes up and says, well, I do this or I need this, they're like, well, Nancy Pelosi, Joe Biden, etc., etc., etc. They're held up and they're lauded and they're supported by the official church. That's another battle that we have to come up against. Because symbolically they're Catholic, and to the outside world they appear Catholic, but we know in our praxis that they're far from it. And we have to negotiate that channel as well, with how we deal as Orthodox Catholics against the so-called cafeteria mainstream, in name only. And that's something that we have to figure out and to work.
Really quick, I know we're cutting close on time. Two things I want to say to be countercultural, to help us fight the battles, as we've all pointed out. And Your Excellency, you made some great points just now. We are fighting, how can you say, well, this Catholic does this and that? Awesome points. So this is how we got to start fighting it. First and foremost, the rosary. If you're not praying the rosary daily, you're not going to get the graces you need to combat this battle we're in. This is your sword. Take up your sword and fight. If you're not willing to fight, you're going to fall. That's it. That's where we're at right now. There's the days, like you guys have just said, the walking in the park and in the beautiful sunshine, that's over. We're uniting with the Catholics in the catacombs, the Catholics that were persecuted in the first 500 years of Holy Mother Church. That's our time and place right now. So take solace in those great martyrs of the faith, because that's what we should be striving to be, just like them. So with the rosary, and then if you can get a copy of this, the Rokata, a great devotional book. Just it's so eclectic and it's so awesome. If you have ADD, ADHD, this is your prayer book, because it's so all over the place. It's awesome because you can jump from devotion to devotion. It doesn't have any rhyme or reason to it. You can chalk up for a random saint of the day, or you can go to our Blessed Mother. You can go to St. Joseph. You can go to Sacred Heart. It's all over the place. It's not like you need to follow it page after page after page. It's not like the Breviary or you know what I mean. So you can just jump all over the place with the book and pick out awesome devotions to better strengthen you spiritually. So I would encourage you to get a copy of this. You can get them new, or you can get them used. If you have any questions, you reach out to us. I've been able to acquire some copies, and I can, help people find this book that's, good pre-modernism and all that stuff. So definitely get a hold of this book and pray the rosary, because right now, just starting out, and I know we're going to go more into things, probably future episodes, but just those two bits right there is what I wanted to plug for people to start getting that.
And remember that read the rosary. We broadcast the rosary every day, 6 p.m. GMT London time. So the more the merrier. Can join us in reciting the rosary. And otherwise, just look out for our programming. There's hours of programs already that we've broadcast, and there will be more to come in the future around catechesis, around tradition, around vocation, around vocational discernment, etc. So check out those things, and remember, every day we broadcast Mass, and with a homily as well. So, tune into Old Roman TV, and we will equip you for the fight, as 'twere. Right, Bishop Kelly, would you give us your blessing, please?
Absolutely. And for the blessing, I would remind our viewers and remind ourselves about the Feast of the Holy Name. It's a time to take stock about our own use of the Holy Name. It can slip in, it's cultural, but remember to be sparingly, bow the head for every knee shall bow, and also to use it efficaciously. Call on the Holy Name when you are in great need, great trouble. To give honor and worship to the Holy Name. So just to bear these things in mind, thoughts to leave you with for the feast tomorrow. And the Lord be with you.
And with thy spirit.
May the blessing of Almighty God, the Father, Son, Holy Ghost, be upon you and remain with you forever.
Amen.
Amen. Lovely. Well, thank you all for watching. Thank you, fathers, for sharing. We'll be back next week, same time, 6:45 p.m. GMT, London, UK time, for Old Romans Unscripted. Next broadcast on this channel will be the Daily Mass tomorrow for Sunday, which is the Feast of the Holy Name, with commemoration of the second Sunday after Epiphany, which is all about the revelation of Christ's divinity in the working of his first miracle at Cana in Galilee. So look out for that. That's 8:30 a.m. GMT, London, UK time tomorrow. All programs, this episode and all previous episodes, are available to view on our YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/Old Roman TV. So everything we've broadcast is available to view on there. Bless you all. Thank you. And we'll see you hopefully all next week. Bye-bye. Oh, 1 second. Pose. Don't speak yet.